Week 10 of the fantasy football season. Here's the top 36 running backs. I'm ranking this week number 1, Saquan Barkley of the Philadelphia Eagles. So what a matchup this week at the Dallas Cowboys. A defense that can't stop anyone. Saquon Barkley's had a good track record versus Cowboy defense with all the seasons he played with the New York Giants. And this week, it wouldn't be surprising to me if Barkley puts up similar numbers like he did last week in that monster performance versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Number 2, Derk Henry of the Baltimore Ravens. Derk Henry, what a season it's been for him. And weekly, he's going to be a top 3 option at the running back position. So this week, another good matchup for Cincinnati. He had a big game weeks ago versus Cincinnati defense. And every week, it seems like Henry is finding the end zone twice. So this week versus Cincinnati in a potential shootout, especially Thursday Night Football. Once again, I think Henry puts up top numbers. Number 3, Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons. So Bijan Robinson, he's definitely gotten things turned around this season, the last month of the year. And this week, a good matchup indoors in New Orleans. Fast track. Robinson, good receiver out of the backfield. Him and Kirk Cousins have a rapport with that. And this offensive line, one of the better run offensive lines in the league. So with that all factored up, I think Bijan Robinson's in for one of his better games this season. Number 4, Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. So staying in the same game, he's got a matchup with the Falcons. With Derek Carr back in the lineup last week, we saw the numbers go up in receptions. And obviously, teams won't load the box as much with Derek Carr behind center compared to a Spencer Rattler at the quarterback position. But Alvin Kamara, like you said, he's a dual threat, one of the best receiving backs in the league. And this week in a potential shootout versus the Falcons, once again, he goes out there in his good game. Number 5, Etienne of the Miami Dolphins. So with 2 in the lineup this season, he's been a top 5 running back. Points per game is Etienne. So last week, a monster performance, over 30 fantasy points in PPR leagues. This week, a great matchup with the Los Angeles Rams, where their defense isn't all that great, in my opinion. And Etienne's a dual threat out of the backfield. He's obviously overtaken the job from Raheem Mostert going back early in the season. And this week, a potential shootout on Monday night. I think Etienne goes out there once again, has a good game. Number 6, staying in the same game, Tyron Williams of the Los Angeles Rams. Tyron Williams, it's been a great season for him once again. And the main thing, he's been healthy. Last season, he had a monster year, but he did miss 4 games. So far, he hasn't missed a game as Tyron Williams. This is a good matchup versus Miami defense. And with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua back in the lineup, there's going to be more running room, I believe, for Tyron Williams. And also, he's a pretty decent receiver out of the backfield. 7, Joe Mixon of the Houston Texans. So what a year it's been for Mixon. I know he missed a couple games early in the season with a high ankle sprain, but ever since he's come back, he's been a top 10 running back easily weekly as Joe Mixon. So this week in a potential shootout on Sunday Night Football with the Detroit Lions coming to town and possibly Nico Collins returning to the lineup this week, it's going to open up the running game even more. Number 8, Breece Hall of the New York Jets. So when you got receivers like Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, it definitely opens up the running game as well for this New York Jet team and Breece Hall. So this week, a good matchup with the Arizona Cardinals. Their defense isn't all that great. We saw DeAndre Swift have a nice game versus them last week. And this week, it could be a potential high-scoring game on the fast track in Arizona. And Breece Hall, he's a dual threat. He was a top 5 pick for a reason in fantasy drafts. So most weeks, he's going to put up elite numbers. Number 9, Aaron Jones of the Minnesota Vikings. Aaron Jones, he's been a definite surprise this season, staying healthy and putting up big numbers. And this offense is loaded with him and Justin Jefferson leading the way. And now TJ Hawkinson back off the ACL tear from last season. So Aaron Jones, he could do it all out of the backfield. He's looked good for this Minnesota Viking team. And he's got an easy matchup this week at the Jacksonville Jaguars. Number 10, James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. So James Cook, it's been some big games and some middle-of-the-pack games like last week. But this week, I like the matchup a lot at the Indianapolis Colts. Their run defense isn't all that great. Last week, Aaron Jones had a good ball game versus them. And this Buffalo Bill team, they could score many ways. Some weeks, it's going to be Cook's week, and some weeks, it's going to be the receivers in the receiving game. But this week, I think it's a little bit of everything, and Cook has a big game. Number 11, Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. So Taylor, when healthy, he's a top 12 running back weekly for fantasy owners. He was a back-end first round, early second round pick in fantasy drafts. This week, not the greatest of matchups versus Buffalo, especially obviously if the game script goes the way where Buffalo's up 10, 14 points and they got to throw a whole lot. But Jonathan Taylor can catch the football out of the backfield. He's one of the only 3 down backs in the league as well as Jonathan Taylor. Number 12, Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. So Gibbs, he's been a game breaker and a big-time running back for the Lions and fantasy owners this season. He gets a majority of his touches in the second half of the game when a defense is worn out and then he just burns him, is Jahmyr Gibbs, and uses his speed. We saw it last week in that game at Green Bay, and this week at Houston in a potential shootout. I think Gibbs is going to get more touches, and this ball game is going to be a good ball game, no doubt about it. So I think Gibbs, once again, has a nice performance. 13, Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers. So McCaffrey finally back after missing the first 9 weeks of the season with injury, and we'll see if CMC could have a decent ball game. So this week, I'm tempering expectations a little bit here for Christian McCaffrey. I believe he's not going to get 100% or even 90% of the workload. I just believe it's possibly 60-40 in his favor over Jordan Mason. But to be honest, Christian McCaffrey in a great matchup at Tampa. He only needs 15, 18 touches to have a productive ball game. 14, DeAndre Swift of the Chicago Bears. DeAndre Swift, it's been a great season for him. I know the first 3-4 weeks of the year, definitely a struggle. Only 2.5 yards per carry for DeAndre Swift. But this week, a good matchup versus the New England Patriots. He's been their top option in this offense. And with Khalil Herbert traded away, that even adds more security of Swift getting a majority of the touches. I know Herbert, he was phased out over the last few weeks here before the trade, but Roschon Johnson's still the backup. But DeAndre Swift, he can run in between the tackles, catch the football out of the backfield. And this week versus the Patriots, expect another good game. 15, Kareem Hunt of the Kansas City Chiefs. So what a fill-in Hunt's been in for Isaiah Pacheco. I thought Carson Steele was going to be the guy after the injury, but Hunt quickly came in and he never looked back. So this week, a tougher matchup versus a good defense of the Denver Broncos. Even though I know last week Derk Henry went out there over 100 yards on the ground, found the end zone twice. But Hunt, he's putting up consistently anywhere from 13, 18 fantasy points a game in PPR leagues. And I think with that benchmark, once again, 16, Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals. So potential shootout this week at Baltimore Thursday night. We saw early in the season, obviously these two teams had a back and forth big time battle. And now with Zach Moss out for the season with the neck injury and Khalil Herbert coming in, he's not going to pick up the playbook right away. Obviously Herbert, with this ball game being tomorrow between these two teams. So Brown, he's a dual threat out of the backfield, catch the football, running between the tackles. And this week in Baltimore, in a potential shootout, I like him as a number 2 back, borderline 1 back. 17, J.K. Dobbins of the Los Angeles Chargers. So this week, pretty decent matchup versus the Tennessee Titans for J.K. Dobbins. Dobbins, he's been a workhorse, believe it or not, for this Charger team. Coming into the year, many people thought it was going to be Gus Edwards. Then he went on IR early in the season. But since the get-go, J.K. Dobbins had big games, 2 games in a row, over 100 yards on the ground to start the season. So last week, 85 yards on the ground, found the end zone twice. And this week, versus the Titans, I think he goes out there and has another good game. 18, Tyron Tracy of the New York Giants. So Tyron Tracy, definitely the number 1 back for this New York Giant team. This week, a great matchup with the Carolina Panthers, a defense that can't stop anyone. And this game, I know, is in Munich, Germany, and anything goes in these, obviously, overseas ball games where usually the scoring is high. So I think Tyron Tracy, as long as he's getting a healthy workload like he has over the last couple weeks, and Singletary hasn't been a threat, I think he has one of his better games of the season. 19, James Conner of the Arizona Cardinals. This week, not a great matchup versus the New York Jets, but there's some weeks we've seen running backs have success. We saw last week Joe Mixon have a nice ball game, 16 fantasy points in PPR leagues. We saw it. Nji Harris going back a couple weeks ago as well, over 100 yards. I think James Conner, he can have a decent ball game in this one, but sometimes his touches are down a little bit depending the game script, even though he could catch the football out of the backfield as well. But Conner this week is a number 2 back for owners. I'm comfortable locking him in. 20, Chuba Hubbard, Carolina Panthers. So this week, a good matchup versus New York Giants. Definitely a possibility Jonathan Brooks could return and make his season debut. But Brooks coming off an ACL and a bad knee injury and being a rookie, I just don't see him right away in game 1 for Brooks coming in. I'm taking a lot of work. So Chuba Hubbard, a big game last week, over 70 yards on the ground, found the end zone twice. And this week in a matchup versus the Giants, where, like I said, these overseas games are usually high scoring, I think he goes out there and it's a good game. 21, David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions. So this line offense, high-powered, 7-1 on the season, getting the football up and down the field. David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, I've said this a whole lot, best backfield tandem in all the NFL. And this week at Houston, I think David Montgomery, he's going to get his touches. He's going to get a goal line stamper. And this has a high-scoring game written all over it. 22, Tony Pollard of the Tennessee Titans. I know last week he went over 120 yards on the ground, was Tony Pollard. But this week, a very tough matchup with the Chargers. They just shut down Nick Chubb. They made that Cleveland Brown offense not even look like an NFL offense in last week's game. And I think it's going to be tough sledding as a whole for Tennessee. But Tony Pollard, even in tough matchups this season, he's gone out there and put up fantasy points. So this week, Tony Pollard, I think he's a nice number 2 option for owners. 23, Ramondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots. So 2 weeks in a row, over 20 fantasy points for Ramondre Stevenson. This week, a tougher matchup with the Chicago Bears, where they run defense. And defense overall, I think, is one of the best in all pro football this season in Chicago. So this week, like I said, at Soldier Field, tougher matchup. But with Drake May in the lineup, at least this offense opens things up. And there are running lanes for Ramondre Stevenson. So this week, I think, is a back-end 2 option at running back. He's a decent play still. 24, Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders. So last week he was trying to give it a go for this Commander team, was warming up before the ball game, but his hamstring tightened up on him and he couldn't give it a go. So this week, I know it's a tough matchup versus the Pittsburgh Steelers, one of the better defenses in the league. But I believe Brian Robinson, if he does play, still can have production. And we know within that 2-3 yard line, he's a lock for a touchdown if he's going to get the touch. 25, Nji Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Nji Harris, it's been solid over the last few weeks here for Harris with a couple of 100-yard games on the ground. So this week, a tough matchup with the Commanders. They beefed up the defense at the NFL trade deadline, getting Marshawn Lattimore, even though we'll see if he plays in this ball game or not. But Nji Harris, with Russell Wilson in the lineup, has had more success. So this week of Commanders, it's going to be a grinded-out type of ball game. And I believe these two teams are similar in many ways. So we'll see if Harris could go out there and have another solid game. 26, Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Rachaad White, right now, I think he's been a little bit of the better back over the last couple weeks in this 50-50 split with him and Bucky Irvin. So this week, a tough matchup versus San Francisco, and that actually plays in his favor because if they're trailing early and often and can't find running lanes, Rachaad White's more the receiving back than Bucky Irvin in this backfield. And we know Tampa Bay's had injuries. Mike Evans out 1 or 2 more weeks. We know Godwin out for the season. And White, he's been catching the football a little bit more since those injuries. So this week versus the Niners, I think he could have a decent performance. 27, Jordan Mason staying in the same game of the Niners. So this week, a good matchup at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Their defense can't stop anyone. We just saw Kareem Hunt go out there for a nice ball game, over 100 yards on the ground and a game-winning touchdown. And Jordan Mason, I still believe he's not going to be phased out of this offense, and he's going to get at least, I think, 8-12 touches in this ballgame with a pretty good matchup at Tampa Bay. Like I said, one of the worst defenses in the league. I think Mason's going to step into some work. I don't think Christian McCaffrey, they're just going to throw him out there and give him 25 to 30 touches. 28, Bucky Irvin staying in the same game with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Irvin and White, they're usually close in the rankings weekly. So Irvin, I believe in between the tackles, a better running back than Rachaad White. And obviously, I think Rachaad White catching the football is one of the best backs in the league, catching the football out of the backfield. So Irvin versus San Francisco, if they want to keep the offense off the field and try to tire this defense out a little bit, he'll get some touches. But I don't think the ceiling's that high. 29, Rico Dowdle, the Dallas Cowboys. So with Cooper Rush in there, quarterback, it could be a tough ball game for this Cowboy team as a whole. And I expect it to be a game where they're trailing early and often have to abandon the run. But the good thing with Dowdle, he's a good receiver out of the backfield. Last week we saw him catch an acrobatic ball in the end zone for a touchdown for this Dallas Cowboy team. And this Cowboy team, I think they're going to try to run the football in this game and keep this Philly offense off the field as best as they can. So Dowdle's going to get touches. Ezekiel Elliott, he's had problems showing up to meetings late where I don't believe he's going to see much of the field at all. And Dalvin Cook, unintended, he looks cooked anyway. 30, Travis Etienne of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Etienne, this whole offense as a whole has dropped off over the last few weeks. So Etienne's in a split with Tank Bigsby. He's more the receiving back. And this week, a very tough matchup versus the Minnesota Vikings, where last week they bottled up Jonathan Taylor for the most part in that ball game. So like I said, this offense has struggled all season. Etienne's had a lot of ailments on and off with injuries all season long. And this week, I don't think it's a high ceiling. 31, Raheem Mostert of the Miami Dolphins. So this week, a good matchup on paper at the Rams. Last week, Kenneth Walker had a good ball game. But obviously with Devon Achane is the number one back over there, getting a lot of touches and making big plays. The ceiling ain't high for Raheem Mostert. Last week, he had a bad fumble early in that game. But if you're in a desperation mode with 4 teams on bye, I guess you throw him out there as a flex. 32, Javonte Williams of the Denver Broncos. So this week, not a great matchup at all at Kansas City. Last week, we didn't see Rachaad White and Bucky Irvin do much versus Kansas City Chiefs defense. And this week, it's going to be tough sledding. Once again, if they're down early and often like they were last week at Baltimore, they're going to abandon the run and have to throw. So Javonte Williams, his ceiling ain't high. But if you could get maybe, luckily, 50, 60 total yards out of him and a goal line stamper, that's going to be a solid game for Williams, but I just don't see it. So you're banking on the touchdown. 33, Tank Bigsby of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Tank Bigsby, in my opinion, he's the better back in between the tackles. He's not catching any passes out of the backfield. He's not a receiving back at all. And this week with a tough matchup versus the Minnesota Vikings, I just don't see Tank Bigsby going out there and really putting up crazy production. So right now he's a back-end option. 34, Tyler Algier of the Atlanta Falcons. So Algier, I've said this a lot, he could be a starting running back, I believe, for 10 to 15 teams in the National Football League right now is Tyler Algier. So this week, a decent matchup in New Orleans. Last week, he had a goal line stamper versus the Dallas Cowboys. And I think Tyler Algier, if he's getting 8 to 12 touches weekly, he's productive at times. And with 4 teams on bye, he cracks the top 36 here. 35, Ray Davis of the Buffalo Bills. So one of the best handcuffed running backs in all the league. And also, I think he could start for 10, 15 teams in the league as well. Here's Ray Davis. Last week took a 63-yard short pass to the house. He's got explosive speed in between the tackles. He's a physical running back. We saw early in the season and the game Cook was out. He had a big game at the New York Jets. And this week in Indianapolis, he's just another running back. If he gets, obviously, 8, 12 touches, he could put up some production. And the 36th and final back on rankings, Austin Eckler of the Washington Commanders. So last week he started with Eckler, had over 15 fantasy points in PPR leagues, found the end zone. But that was an easy matchup versus the New York Giants. And this week, with Robinson most likely back, in my opinion, versus Steelers, I think Austin Eckler, his ceiling's not going to be high in this one. I think 7-10 fantasy points possibly in PPR leagues, if that, for Austin Eckler. Because if this is a tight game, I think in the trenches is where the Commanders want to be physical and try to win the game that way, where Austin Eckler is more on the outside and catching the football, not in between the tackles. So that's a top 36 running back. So I'm ranking for Week 10 of the fantasy football season.